want to give you a quick peek at our new Wild Hall kitchen, which is rapidly nearing completion. This project has been made possible by your generous giving, in addition to a lot of work by Linda Leibel, me, and about a dozen other church volunteers. I'm really excited about this new kitchen because everybody needs food. So the food prepared here will expand our ability to work together, to play together, to connect with our community, and to serve people in need. I'm also very excited about our hopes to finally build an elevator to make Wild Hall easily accessible to everybody. This hall has already been used for church gatherings, weddings, memorial services, social justice projects, and as a meeting and event space for other organizations. In fact, there's some people using it right now. Full accessibility will significantly expand our ability to perform our mission of transforming lives and the world. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Linda Leibel, and I serve as president of the Board of Trustees of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spartanburg this year. Thanks for joining us this morning. As the pandemic enters a new phase with the forecast that it will last many more months, the UUCS Board has weighed carefully how to maintain our physical safety while also providing for the emotional well-being of the congregation. We must keep one another safe, and we must cultivate our connection with one another. We continue to practice basic public health protocols to keep one another safe, wearing masks, social distancing, limiting group sizes, being outside whenever possible, and hand washing. Given our need to continue to balance physical safety with the connections with one another, our board, with the support of the COVID committee, has approved these steps. Small groups, such as covenant groups, and committees are encouraged to gather in person outside of homes or on the church grounds. Practice all safety protocols. Please consider making these meetings hybrid, in person and with virtual options, to provide access and connections with everyone involved, whether they can attend in person or not. We'll continue to plan one-off events on the church grounds, utilizing carefully planned and all of our safety protocols, such as the social justice triple, quintuple dips, Grimke mural dedications, and next Sunday's service. Next Sunday, November 22nd at 11 a.m., weather permitting, we will hold a service on the backyard of the church. We will live stream this. It'll be our annual Thanksgiving service, and we will celebrate our beloved Keith Plumley, who is retiring as the music director after more than 10 years. Please bring your own quilt or chair, wear a mask, and join us in person or watch live. UUCS First Friday fundraising events website is now live. This year we're flipping things around for the annual auction. You can now shop for items, services, events, and meals to purchase. Think of online stores as a virtual sign-up sheet of items to buy, things to do, and meals for your family. Each month on the first Friday, we'll be releasing new items. So visit uucs.org/fundraising to learn more about these items. Watch a video from our stewardship chair and shop. There's also information on how you can submit your own donated items, events, and services to include in our online fundraising store. Especially in times like these, we need each other. Thanks for being part of the congregation today. We are a people of faith and hope. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for being with us, a part of this congregation this morning. The announcements that Linda just offered are practical. They're about the business of the church. And I want to just call attention to how extraordinary they are. I want to express gratitude to Linda and to our board, to the leadership of this church in this most difficult of years. It is unbelievable the things that are happening in this church, even under the duress of the times in which we're living. Linda shared with you about innovative fundraising to help our church remain strong financially as we are right now throughout this year. And she shared with you all the ways that we are taking care of each other, protecting each other as cases rise and hospitalizations increase during the pandemic, so that we can, in good conscience, be planning for another in-person worship service next Sunday. It's just extraordinary that we are in a position to do that, given all that is happening around us. Last week's hybrid service, in-person and live stream, went phenomenally well. We've had a tremendous outpouring of support from those who participated in both ways, through video and by being here in person. If the weather allows, I want to encourage you to join us on the back lawn of the church next Sunday. Bring something that you can sit in. There'll be spaces marked that indicate how to sit safely apart. We ask that everybody wear a mask or a face covering so that we are taking extra precaution to be safe with one another. And if you don't feel comfortable coming in person, or if weather doesn't permit, we will still be live streaming at 11 as we always do. I want to thank you for the ways that you engage to build up this congregation and the support that you give the leadership of this congregation so that we can do all of the social justice and the RE and the pastoral care, all of the educational work that we're doing together as a congregation. It's just extraordinary. As you have already seen in this video, and as you have received in your mailbox, if you're a member or a friend of this church, you will know that our congregation has launched here at year end an elevator campaign, a campaign to raise funds to support the construction of an elevator between the first floor and the basement of our church. I want to emphasize again just how extraordinary it is that we are in a position as a congregation in the midst of a pandemic to be thinking ahead like this, to be considering a way to redesign the way we live in this space while we are absent from it. And that we are in a position as a team, with the resources of this congregation, to ask if we are able, each of us, to contribute something to the elevator campaign. No problem if that's not what we need to do. This is a time of difficulty for all of us. But if we are able to do that, to see if we might pull this implausible feat off. There are many reasons why I think this is a good time for us to make an attempt on the elevator. I've named some just now. But I want to tell you the thing that sold me on this project. The thing, as minister in this church, that struck my heart, that made me think this was a good time to work on the physical heart of this building. An elevator that would connect spaces that are connected only with difficulty now. Something that would be transformative to how we live in this facility. It wasn't the strength of the church's finances, although that was a factor. It wasn't what this will do for our future, although that certainly is a major consideration. It wasn't even the possibility of serving our community with even greater strength, although that is a major motivation. All of those things are critically important to the strategy. But there was something more to the heart. Something that convinced me this was a good time to act. And it was this. It was the group of leaders, each very different from the other. Some who have had outright conflicts with each other. A group of disparate leaders from many backgrounds and very different points of view who came together and built a vision of what we could do as a congregation together. That coming together across conflict and difference, joining together of many past presidents of this congregation, many key long-term leaders of this congregation who do not see things the same way, who often don't even speak the same language, and yet who built a shared vision and felt strongly that this was a moment when we might move as a congregation, that coming together across difference and conflict to move together as a minister, as a pastor, as a spiritual guide in this congregation, that made me sit up. It made me think, this is something different. And it is worth risking ourselves on this project to see what we might do across our differences together. This elevator project, it would change the physical heart of our congregation. What excites me most is to see that already, whatever the outcome, it is changing. It is changing the spiritual heart of this congregation. That's who we are. Every one of us different from the other. All of us seeing the world differently, not the same perspective. and implausibly, we join together across those differences to do things in a broken world that should not be, but that we make real. Welcome.
Our chalice lighting this morning comes from our gray hymnal. It is a responsive reading. The refrain to this reading is, "We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love." I invite you to join me in this refrain. A litany of atonement. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time we have struck out in anger without just cause, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For losing sight of our unity, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
To
This beloved community believes that actions speak louder than words. If you are new to this community, please go to our website at uucs.org to see how we show up in the world, because we do. To guide our actions, we have constructed words as a congregation to remind us how we will be, both with one another and in the world. This is our covenant. Please join me in speaking the truth of our covenant. We are a people of faith and hope. Together, we covenant to strive to become our better selves, to honor both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to respond to systems of violence and oppression with a power of a love beyond belief. We are a beloved community. This is the time in our service when we honor that most. We see one another. We honor one another. We hold one another up. We cry with one another. We dance with one another. We sing with one another. Please take this time to share your care for this community. We honor what is in your heart, your joys, and your sorrows. This is also the time when we greet one another, when we see one another, no matter who we are, no matter how we believe, no matter who we love. We care for one another. Please take a moment and breathe in this care. Our beloved community also embraces the world. Again, to see what we are doing, please go to uucs.org. Below the live stream, there is a section called Help. This website, amazingly, is updated weekly, and it contains all of the ways that you can show up and help with your time, with your talents, with your teddy bears. It's all there. We have a tradition of sharing the plate. This month, we share the plate with the victims of Hurricane Eta in Central America. We are doing this through the work of the International Red Cross, which already has boots on the ground there. You can look at the website, the link attached on our website, to see what their work is focusing on. Specifically, this is a call for $20 million to help the International Red Cross support the Honduran, Nicaraguan, and Guatemalan Red Cross to help deliver an assistance and support to the early recovery of those folks affected by Hurricane Eta, hopefully for the next 24 months. They will focus on the following areas: shelter, livelihood and basic needs, health, which of course includes mental health for survivors and psychological support, water, sanitation, and hygiene. I encourage you to give only what you can to these efforts.
All month we are reflecting on the beloved community, a visionary concept at the heart of the UU tradition that is much bigger than the UU tradition. The concept of the beloved community, a community where everyone belongs just as they are, comes to us through justice movements throughout time in this nation and far beyond this nation's borders, but most directly out of the civil rights movement, a way in which those who worked for equal rights in the early and middle part of the 20th century conceived of what they were driving for. Not only a place where laws changed and access increased, although those practicalities were of absolute necessity and were the pointed goals of their campaigns, but a world where everyone belonged and could thrive. Our reading today comes from a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King was one of the key proponents of the idea of the beloved community. And this sermon is one of the key expositions of this vision. As I read it, I want to ask you to hear both the high ideals and the real experience practicality of this vision, both of those things together. And most of all, I want to ask you to think about who's talking and where they're saying this. This is a black man speaking in 1950s Alabama. A black man who's stepping forward to lead a movement that earns him death threats and imprisonment, and eventually his assassination. These aren't just stained glass window words. These aren't cheap sentiments. This is a way of life that accepts risk for the sake of transformation. Listen to these words from Dr. King's sermon, Loving Your Enemies, which he offered on November 17th. I read this on November 15th. November 17th, 1957, in Montgomery, Alabama. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. There is a power in love that our world has not discovered yet. Most men and most women, most people, never discover it, for they believe in hitting for hitting. They believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. They believe in hating for hating. But this isn't the way. And oh, this morning, as I think of the fact that our world is in transition now, our whole world is facing a revolution. Our nation is facing a revolution. Our nation. One of the things that concerns me most is that in the midst of the revolution of the world, in the midst of the revolution of this nation, that we will discover the meaning of these words. History, unfortunately, leaves some people oppressed and some people oppressors. Remember who's saying these words. Remember who's telling us this. This is a black man in 1950s Alabama speaking these words to us. History, unfortunately, leaves some people oppressed and some people oppressors. And there are three ways that individuals who are oppressed can deal with their oppression. One of them is to rise up against their oppressors with physical violence and corroding hatred. But oh, this isn't the way. For the danger and the weakness of this method is its futility. Violence creates many more social problems than it solves. Violence isn't the way. Another way is to acquiesce and to give in, to resign yourself to the oppression. There's 70 million people in this country that I wish could hear me right now. Some people do that. They discover the difficulties of the wilderness moving into the promised land, and they would rather go back to the despots of Egypt because it's difficult to get in the promised land. And so they resign themselves to the fate of oppression. They somehow acquiesce to this thing. But that too isn't the way, because non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. But there is another way, and that is to organize mass nonviolent resistance based on the principle of love. It seems to me that this is the only way as our eyes look to the future. As we look out across the years and across the generations, let us develop and move right here. We look to the future and move right here. We must discover the power of love, the redemptive power of love. And when we discover that, we will be able to make of this old world a new world. We will be able to make all of us better. Love is the only way. With our mind cast to the future, let us share silence right here, together, now. Share silence with me. Love your enemies. This is the hardest teaching. This meditation has been planned for many months. It's connected to a whole series of meditations on the beloved community, which will continue next week, and I'll share more about the background next week's service. But this meditation is at the heart of what the beloved community is in its vision and in its methodology and its practicality. And as I have looked forward to this meditation over months, looking at all that's happening around us, in our nation and in our world, and in my own private life, I have wanted to get rid of it, to not talk about it. What I'm sharing with you today is in no way meant to ignore the reality of pain and suffering in our lives, of what people have done to us and what we have done to others. And I stand before you very mindful that as recently as last night, I was in conflict with someone very close to me, wanting to avoid this meditation today because of the way that it holds me to account as well. We have this beautiful vision of the beloved community, a phrase that rolls off the tongue and that we share widely in this movement and in justice movements throughout our nation, throughout time. This vision of a world where everyone belongs, everyone just as they are, and evolving, not static as we are, but evolving just as we are. Our authentic selves through time. A place where we welcome each other. A place beyond inclusion. Where it's not one party that wields the power and permits others to come sometimes as they desire. No, a place where we can just walk in the door because there's a door and we can come through it, or roll through the door, or be carried through the door, or however it is that we come through the door, we come through and we belong as much as anybody else. And where there's ample to share, resources for us all, and not in the abstract, abundance of food, of drink, of smell and taste and touch, all those good things in life, the deep goodness of life, overflowing and abundant and available to us all. Imagine a feast. Imagine a feast where everyone you love shows up and everyone has just what they love to eat and shares family style with one another. The ones that we've lost, the ones from whom we are estranged, the ones we haven't seen in a long time, and the ones that we hold closest, all there together sharing a great banquet. And all the people that we might want to know across the world, the people that interest us, the people that we read, the people whose music we listen to, all of those people there as well, gathered together, the abundance of resources of food and drink and warmth and friendship, and the abundance of just people, and more than people. They don't have to be people to be at the table. We get rid of the table and sit on the floor together. Everyone there, a great feast, a festival, a party, where we all are. It's such a beautiful vision. It fills me up to think of it. It makes me hungry to think of it. It makes me want to sit down with people and eat. And it pulls our work forward with power, all of our work for voting justice and ecological action and just being a neighbor in the South Converse neighborhood and immigration justice, the work of consciousness. All of that is about building a world where we just belong and have what we need and more, where we can just share like we were taught in kindergarten. that simple and that beautiful. The basic poetry of life together. It's such a beautiful vision. And then the vision pulls us too far. It's so good up to this point. But those who share with us about the beloved community always push it too far. And they say, imagine your friends. Imagine your loved ones. Imagine all those throughout time, the human and the more than human, who you would want to be with, all gathered together, and your enemies too. We live in a world of so much division. We have a vision of unity and equity and beauty and love and humanity and friendship. And the real pain of our lives cuts across that. All the ways that people foment conflict, selfishness, anger, hatred, real things that have real impact in our lives, that deny us access to health care, deny us jobs, deny us happiness, haunt our dreams, haunt our waking, do real damage to our minds and our hearts and our bodies, that kill in our streets, in our homes. All of that horror, and it is horror, all of that violence. And people who seek that out, who pursue it, who churn it up, who use it, who manipulate it for their own purposes. In our nation's capital yesterday morning, and through time, for 400 years on the North American continent, and 500 on the two continents of the Americas, and for millennia on every continent. People who choose violence and oppression to destroy love and to make love something that is beyond belief, beyond hope, something that seems weak and sentimental, implausible, impossible. This is the real world. But the vision of the beloved community calls on us to make this a community for everyone. A community where everyone can enter and share. How do we do that? How do we live in this paradox? A vision of everyone and a reality of direct violence and pain. How do we hold these things together in our real lives? How do we even tolerate this meditation and stick with it to the end? When the faces of people who have hurt us are easily seen in our imaginations, maybe even right there in our own homes. This is the hardest teaching. This is the worst work. It would be really nice to stop right here and walk away. I can tell you that physically I would like to do that right now. And this is what is asked of us. Love your enemies. How do you do that? How do we do that? The beloved community is built in 3 steps. We have to think big. We have to claim a vision that is bigger than the pain of the world and bigger even than ourselves. so that as we cast our minds into the future, we begin to imagine something that is impossible and that is implausible, and yet can contain all of this paradox. We begin with imagination that defies reality. And the beloved community is anti-oppression. We don't capitulate to false equivalencies. After the white supremacist marches in Charlottesville, when we heard the leader of this nation say that there were good people on both sides, we were being fed false equivalencies that reinforce at best the status quo, and most likely and worst foment outright white supremacy and systemic racism. That's not how the beloved community is built. We do not acquiesce in the cause of justice. We are clear about the violence that has been done through time, about deliberate and direct legal and economic and religious and relational and societal oppression that has been used against people of every kind in our society, in our nation, and through time. We imagine the possibility of something that can contain us all, something bigger than what seems possible. And we do not compromise on an anti-oppression view that claims the worth and dignity of every person and eschews false equivalencies as one more tool of oppression. And we work for everyone. For everyone. Even for those who've caused so much pain. It seems impossible. But I want to offer you an example from our own time. One that does exactly this, impossibly and practically and highly effectively. One that our own congregation has participated in, to which many of us look for leadership and guidance in this day. I want to give you an example of what it means to love our enemies, to think big, to not let go of the anti-oppression lens, and to nevertheless work for everyone. Dr. King led a part of the civil rights movement. And the work of the civil rights movement was to fight for voting rights and equal access in schools, in the workplace, to try to reclaim some of what this nation had promised but withheld through legal oppression and through societal oppression, decade after decade after decade for centuries. And in the course of that work, Dr. King and his colleagues, all the people who organized and worked, employed the strategy of nonviolence, not to aggress against those who were executing injustice, but to use nonviolence as a means to show the injustice of the situation, to discipline themselves in their actions, to reveal the injustice of our society, and to claim what was rightfully theirs. They earned so many enemies in that work. And yet the goal was the same, not to take from others, but to gain for all. These actions were a work of practical, legal, and economic and societal reality on behalf of all. And when the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965, Dr. King and his team, his colleagues, looked at what had been accomplished and all that still needed to be done. They looked into the heart of this country and they claimed an even greater vision. They asked themselves, where does all this division and violence come from? What is the root? What is the cause? What is the heart that has become so diseased and corrupt in our nation? And how could we heal it? And this is what they saw. They saw that the origins of violence and oppression in our nation, that the origins of racism itself, went back to our colonies and to the deliberate decision of planters, of owners, of aristocrats, of people who controlled economic and political power, to divide white and black laborers, to give them the names white and black when those categories had never been used before, to separate them through division so that they would not work together. By dividing labor, and think about what a charged word that is in our culture, labor. By dividing labor along racialized lines, these owners could control that labor at low wages for centuries, down to today. It may seem far-fetched, but this is exactly what happened in our history. Economic and political power divided workers against one another so that they came to experience violence from each other, hatred and division, so that they could not even understand one another's worldviews. That is what racism is, and that is what economic exploitation is, and that is the history of our country. That is what happened in our nation's capital yesterday. Group of people mobilized under a complete fabrication, something that's not even true about the outcome of our election, because of division and hatred and economic exploitation. People divided against each other, unable to see each other to work together, all intentionally, and all leading to violence against thousands and millions of people who have lived on this continent for 400 years. Comprehend the devastation. Dr. King and his team looked at this history, the very heart of racism, the very creation of racialized categories in our country. The words white and black that had never been used before in this way, in English, created for this purpose, to divide people against each other in order to exploit them, and this devastation of centuries that had unfolded since. They looked into the broken heart of our country, and they organized a new movement, a movement that they called the Poor People's Campaign. And their goal was to heal the history that had broken in 1619 in Jamestown. Their goal was to go back to the very origins of our country and to bind the wound. Their goal was to bring white laborers and black laborers and Latinx laborers and indigenous laborers together in a non-violent movement, not violent workers' revolution, a non-violent movement for economic justice for all, not to attack owners, not to attack the economic and political power, but to transform it for the benefit of all. Because if everyone can belong and everyone can work together, the abundance that we can create will feed all of us, will serve all of us, to the exclusion of none, no matter our past. Enemies join together in movement for us all. And this movement, so to the heart of our country, so powerful to diagnose what had divided us and pitted us against each other for centuries, what had caused so much devastation through time. This movement, so precisely placed its healing hand on the broken heart of our nation that somebody shot Dr. King to stop it. Dr. King never got killed until he and his team did this. And then he died for sure. He died for us all. And his friends kept going. That movement did not stop. In the wake of Dr. King's death and their grief, they still organized the Poor People's Campaign. And through losses and defeats for decades, they still kept going, talking about joining people together across their differences to work for common cause. After setback after setback after setback, and deliberate division after deliberate division, political campaign after political campaign under the rubric of law and order and war against crime, all of which were to divide white people and black people and Latinx people and indigenous people from joining together to work in coalition. After decade after decade after defeat, people kept organizing under the banner of the Poor People's Campaign. And in our nation today, that campaign thrives. It is a standard bearer for justice in our country. It is the benchmark for voting justice movements and economic justice movements and civil rights movements in our country today. It is a leader in racial justice and healing. It is a leader in transgender rights in our country. It is a leader in people of religious conviction joining together across the differences of their religions to strive together for the beloved community. It is strategic. It is practical. It raises money every day. It goes into the streets and marches every day. It gets arrested, and it succeeds. It is at work. And our own congregation has found ways to join in that work. Love your enemies is the hardest possible teaching. And on the surface and in the pain of our lives, it's terrible. It's a terrible, heart-wrenching teaching that I would like to walk away from. I sat up all night wrestling with it in my own private life. But if we take it seriously, if we take it as the call of the beloved community in the future that we're trying to get to, calling back to us to a bigger vision and an anti-oppression lens which we will not relinquish, and striving for everyone, if we will listen to this teaching, love your enemies, what it will cause us to do is to look to the heart. What lies at the heart? Not how do we compromise in pain and suffering? Not at all. Not how do we just act like everything's okay? Not at all. How do we look with a penetrating gaze to the heart of violence? Where did it come from? Why are these people my enemies to begin with? And when we find the reason with love, we strive to transform it, to transform the broken and diseased heart of our society until blood courses through our veins and we can thrive as a people. Every one of us without exception, friends and enemies, loved ones and lost ones, black ones and white ones, Latinx and indigenous, straight and gay, trans and queer, of every religion, of every view, of every ideology, everyone living in abundance. It seems impossible. It is the big vision, and it calls to us from the future. To heal our hearts. Love your enemies, especially when it's the last thing you want to do.
Is it getting better? Or do you feel the same? Will it make it easier on you now? You've got someone to blame. You say, one love, one life, one need in the night, one love, get to share it. Leaves you, darling, if you don't care for it. Did I disappoint you? Or leave a bad taste in your mouth? You act like you never had love, and you want me to go without. Well, it's too late tonight to drag the past out into the light. We're one, but we are not the same. We get to carry each other one. Have you come here for forgiveness? Have you come to raise the dead? Have you come here to play Jesus to the lepers in your head? Well, did I ask too much, more than a lot? You gave me nothing, now that's all I've got. We're one, but we are not the same. You see, we hurt each other, then we do it again. You say, love is a temple, love's a higher law. Love is a temple, love's a higher law. You ask me to enter, but then you make me crawl, and I can't keep holding on to what you got, 'cause all you got is hurt. One love, one blood, one life. You got to do what you should. One life with each other, sisters and my brothers. One life, but we are not the same. We get to carry each other one.
Join me again in the Litany of Atonement. The refrain, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible, we forgive ourselves and each other. we begin again in love. For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For losing sight of our unity, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
Love, especially those you hate, not as a cheap sentiment, not as a weak response, not as an imaginary ideal, as a penetrating gaze to the heart, for the transformation of us all.
We have spent time together, and these holy moments give us strength to go down the winding road until we meet again. We have spent time together, and these holy moments give us strength